Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Emily Pelly, and I am the Publications Coordinator for Ratio Christi Canada. Ratio Christi Press has put out some fantastic resources for university students and for you, all addressing different important apologetics issues of today. And so we're going to talk to one author of one of those booklets today, and that's Craig Keener. Craig has written the booklet about miracles. So welcome, Craig.
It's great to be with you, Emily.
All right, so please introduce yourself.
I am FM and Ada Thompson Professor of Biblical Studies at Asbury Theological Seminary. I did my PhD in New Testament and Christian Origins at Duke University. I converted from atheism to Christianity many decades ago. And I'm married to Dr. Medine Musunga Keener from Congo, Brazzaville in Central Africa.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So in your booklet, you start off with a really amazing story from Barbara Kaminsky-Snyder, who I said her name correctly, and her miraculous healing. I'd like to just hear your reflections on all of the stories of miracles you have heard. Has there been something in particular that has really impacted your heart and your life?
Well, I was looking for analogies because, obviously in the New Testament, you've got a lot of miracles. And so I was looking for modern analogies because some people say, well, these things couldn't have happened back then because they don't happen today. And I knew plenty of people who claimed to have witnessed things like this, and I've witnessed some, but, I hadn't witnessed anything as dramatic as raising from the dead. Or, I had witnessed a storm stilled, but I hadn't witnessed a raising from the dead. And so, but I would interview people about their stories to get the firsthand information. And the one that kind of was a turning point for me was when I interviewed Antoinette Malambe in Congo, Brazzaville. I mean, some of the other stories had medical documentation. Some of the other stories, were more dramatic in some ways. But this was the turning point for me personally, because I interviewed her and she talked about how her daughter, Therese, was bitten by a snake. She stopped breathing. And for 3 hours, so she'd strapped the child to her back, ran to a nearby village because there was no medical help available in her village, nearby village where a family friend, Coco Goma Moise, was doing ministry. He prayed for Therese. She started breathing again. The next day she was fine. In 6 minutes with no oxygen, irreparable brain damage has started in. But what got my attention in this case was that when I was able to interview Antoinette Malambe was my mother-in-law, and Therese is my sister-in-law, and she's about my age. No brain damage, has a master's degree. So,
wow.
But the story you gave with Barbara Kaminsky-Snyder, by that point, I was like, I was fully on board with this because I had interviewed so many people. I had enough medical documentation. But with Barbara Kaminsky-Snyder, she had been for 15 years physically deteriorating from a very severe form of multiple sclerosis, so that in her words, her hands were curled up like a pretzel. Her body was curled up like a pretzel. She said she had to be hooked up to a machine to help her diaphragm move so she could breathe. She'd gone blind. I mean,
wow. For
15 years, she'd spent half the last 15 years in the hospital. Her most recent hospital visit, they decided there'd been a don't resuscitate order, and they said she won't make it back here again. And then one day, some friends were visiting and reading, people who had written letters that they were praying for, and suddenly she heard a voice off to the side that nobody else heard, saying, "My child, rise up and walk." Now, her muscles, she had no control over her muscles, but suddenly she jumped out of bed. First thing that she noticed was that she could see her feet flat on the floor. Second thing, that her hands were curled. And third thing she noticed was she's seeing them with her eyes. And she's, unplugging the things hooked up to her and runs out, greets her father. I mean, normally in a case like this, you expect the muscles to be atrophied over the years, but she was healed so completely that she was actually, her muscles weren't even atrophied. I mean, this is highly unusual. But I consulted, well, actually, 3 of her doctors from that time all reported this in print. And I consulted a couple of them, followed up with a couple of them, got their side of the story. All of them agreed this was only explicable as a miracle.
Wow.
Now, that was 1981. So 40 years, no recurrence of this. She did pass away from COVID just a couple of years ago, but never did she have this again.
Wow.
So we have a number of accounts like that. And yeah, the principle of analogy that people have used to rule things out from the past actually suggests that these things happen today. They could have happened back then too.
Right, yeah. Okay, well, I mean, miracles is certainly something that has captivated humanity, whether you're a Christian or not. What do you know about like the statistics around how many people have claimed to witness a miracle?
Yeah. Obviously, the ones who believe in miracles, that's a higher statistic, but the ones who claim to have witnessed them, obviously there hasn't been a global survey of every nation, but there was a survey, a Pew Forum survey, very respectable survey done in 2006, I believe it is, of Pentecostals and Charismatics in just 10 nations. And of the Pentecostals and Charismatics in the 10 nations they chose, a cumulative figure of about 200 million claimed to have witnessed divine healing.
Okay.
Now, just in case you don't like Pentecostals or Charismatics, that's not nice, but just, just in case you want somebody else, the control group was other Christians, and about 39% of them in these countries overall claimed to have witnessed or experienced divine healing. So, I mean, this is just 10 countries. I mean, the ones they chose obviously were the ones where they knew there were a lot of people who would believe in it, but we're talking about hundreds of millions of people who claim to have witnessed this.
Right.
And some of them very strikingly, because in some places, it's the main means of people becoming Christians, witnessing these things. So it isn't something like, I mean, a lot of them have their own indigenous healing traditions. This was something more extraordinary, something that really got people's attention, not something that just typically goes away on its own.
Right.
In China, there was a report from within the China Christian Council around the year 2000 that in the previous 20 years, about half of all conversions to Christianity were due to what they called faith healing experiences. The house church estimates, some of the house church estimates, well, the ones that I've seen, are closer to 90%, especially in the rural areas. Now, I have no way to, go back and evaluate all of those. But I mean, I've interviewed a number of people. I've interviewed, I think, scores or hundreds of people, and they have reported, some rather dramatic things, including a couple that I just mentioned. There also was a survey of doctors, medical doctors, who, when they're going to talk about miracles, they're going to use it a bit more, how should I say it? Anyway, they're coming from a scientific approach. So you're not going to be talking about something that just goes away on its own. And the survey of 1,000 physicians in the US, over half of them, and this is in the context of a question about miracles happening today like they happened in the Bible, it asked them, have you witnessed any? And over half of them said yes. So there's a lot of witnesses, and obviously we accept the value. I mean, we have to sort it, we have to evaluate it, but we accept as valuable eyewitness testimony in law, journalism, sociology, anthropology, and what I work on, especially historiography. So, and then, for those who don't like that, we've got medical documentation, but obviously eyewitness testimony, we've got so much of it.
Right. Okay, so you're touching on something that's quite interesting. So you've talked in your booklet about the prevailing worldview of unbelief. and how in our culture today, skepticism is king, it seems, especially skepticism surrounding the biblical claims of miracles. So one thing that stood out to me in your discussion was the anti-supernatural worldview that's pervaded not just secular culture, but the church culture as well, and biblical scholarship. So can you help us understand that a little bit more? What allowed for biblical scholarship to be more dismissive of the supernatural?
Yeah, no, this is not all cultures, obviously, but especially Western academic culture, and yeah, it is seeped into the church as well. A lot of it goes back to deists in the 1500s, 1600s, especially 1600s, the more radical deists. And I think they influenced Hume. There was a dissertation some decades ago that showed how much of David Hume's argument just came straight out of the deists. But Hume was very popular in philosophic circles and had great influence because of some of his other essays. His essay on miracles actually has been so critiqued over the centuries, both by his contemporaries, and there have been publications by Cambridge and Oxford, and the one by Oxford is called Hume's Abject Failure, his argument about miracles. And then somebody said, "You just wrote that because you're a Christian." He said, "I'm not a Christian. I just think it was a bad argument." But anyway, Hume's argument, people should actually read it, because I mean, it's kind of the basis where people say, "Oh, everybody knows that doesn't happen." But you read his arguments. I mean, the first half of his essay says miracles violate natural law. And the only reason that you would accept it is, one, you believe that natural law is prescriptive rather than descriptive, which doesn't fit modern understandings of natural law. Two, you take his word for it over the people on whom he was depending, like Isaac Newton and the Newtonians, who believed in miracles, biblical miracles. And three, you believe that God is subject to the laws that he put in nature. I mean, anyway, the second half of his essay deals with what we just talked about eyewitnesses. He uses a circular argument so that the only credible eyewitnesses are the people who are so smart they'd never claim to have seen a miracle. I mean, it's circular in that sense, but it has to be educated, and it's very ethnocentric. It has to be white, has to be European. It's very, I mean, today we would just like, that is wrong. You can't talk like that. And he actually gives a couple examples of miracle reports from educated white Western people. A couple of them with medical documentation, and all he says in response is, "We don't believe that. Why would we take anything else seriously?" I mean, that's not even an argument.
No.
But that influenced academic culture in various disciplines, including in biblical studies. Obviously, not everybody adopted it, but like in the 1800s, you have David Friedrich Strauss, who historiographically was on a better foot than some of his contemporaries, who said, Jesus walking on the water, he just knew where the rocks were out in the middle of the Lake of Galilee, which is hundreds of feet deep. But what Hume said, Hume would have said it, but Strauss said, was that these things are just myths and legends that evolved over generations of time. Meanwhile, one of Strauss's own friends, Edward Morica, was bent over, barely able to walk due to a diagnosed spinal problem. He was visiting German Lutheran pastor Johann Christoph Blumhardt. He was miraculously healed. He was hiking in the mountains. And when Strauss heard about this, he couldn't dismiss it as something that evolved just over generations of time. He said, well, it must have been, his diagnosed spinal problem must have been merely psychosomatic, but he couldn't use the same argument that he used. And then in the 20th century, Rudolf Bultmann was a major figure on this too. But some of the things Bultmann dismissed, actually, he dismissed some miracle accounts from the previous generation. We actually have eyewitness accounts from there. So, these things weren't legendary. And
right.
So not to say that these people didn't make any valid contributions to New Testament scholarship, but this was not one of their areas of strength.
Okay, so you see this as starting a very long time ago. This isn't a new
Yeah.
phenomenon.
No,
This is
no.
rooted in older thoughts. And
Yes.
okay,
Yeah,
that's
much,
very interesting.
much. I think it was more dominant a generation ago than it is now. But yeah, in biblical studies. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So would you say, does that mean you're seeing a change in biblical studies one way or the other?
I think it's changing in a positive direction. But one of the things, I don't know if this is true for all the humanities, but in biblical studies, you have people going in so many different directions, it's often hard to speak of a consensus. But hopefully there's at least a degree, for most scholars, a degree of mutual respect for different positions that you can make a case for. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, very interesting. So thinking about some of the accounts of miracles in the New Testament,
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious just to hear you reflect about, is there a miracle or an account that really sticks out to you? Maybe you had studied it, or it just had a particular influence or impact on your journey.
Oh boy. I guess all of them. So many of them. But I know a summary given by Jesus himself. It's in Matthew 11, 5 and 6, and Luke 7, 21, 22, especially 22. It's the passage where John the Baptist, he announced that the one coming after him was going to immerse in the Holy Spirit and fire. And he hears that, John is in prison, and he hears that Jesus is healing people and casting out spirits and stuff. And John the Baptist is like, he's not baptizing anybody in fire. I don't know if this is, maybe I got this wrong, that this is Jesus. So he sends to Jesus some messengers and says, are you the one that we're supposed to be expecting, or should we be expecting somebody else? And he's respectfully trusts Jesus to give the right answer. And Jesus responds by saying, because these messengers are with him for a while, go tell John what you've heard and seen. So appealing to eyewitness evidence, the blind see, the deaf hear, the disabled walk, the dead are raised, and so on. And good news is preached to the poor. Well, some of the things that he says there are lines directly from the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 35, verses 5 and 6, where the blind see, the deaf hear, the disabled walk, and then also from Isaiah 61, where good news is preached to the poor. And what he's saying is, John, I am the one who brings in the kingdom, who brings in the restoration. Because the context of these passages in Isaiah refers to that final time, the consummation when God will make everything new and wipe away every tear from our eyes, and that's something we're looking forward to. Obviously, it hasn't happened in the whole world yet, but Jesus is saying, I'm giving a foretaste of that now. And so in light of that, when God does this for anybody, even if he doesn't do it to all of us, well, he doesn't, obviously it doesn't always happen, but when God does it for anybody, it's a reminder to all of us of God's promise of a world made new. So it's a blessing to all of us when we see it happen to anybody, because it's a foretaste of what's coming.
Right. Yeah, that's so wonderful. Okay, so what advice would you have for fellow believers who are trying to gain a better understanding of miracles? Perhaps they're new to the faith or have been in it for a while and they're just grappling with the supernatural. What advice would you give them?
Recognize that the biblical worldview, in terms of, I mean, obviously they're using the language of their day, so I'm not talking about cosmology and everything else, but the biblical worldview spiritually is reality. And so as we learn to trust that, as we learn to take the different foretastes we get, and whether they're to us or other witnesses that we find trustworthy, to take those and say, okay, this is a foretaste of a world made new. I can trust God. And in the hard times, well, I mean, we see Jesus on the cross. That's like the deepest revelation of God, that even when things are at their darkest, God is at work to bring about his purposes,
Mm.
but to remember that the cross is followed by the resurrection, and to trust the God of miracles.
Trust the God of miracles. Amen. That's beautiful. So tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now.
Sure. I've just finished writing a multi-volume commentary on Mark for the ICC series with T&T Clark, and I did a multi-volume commentary on Acts, but a co-author and I have just finished a short one on Acts together, and another one. There's a new commentary series called the Word and Spirit Commentary Series with Baker Academic, and so I have another commentary in there, a book on suffering to complement the books on miracles. The books on miracles should make you happy. The books on suffering, anyway, lament is a biblical idea too. We need to recognize the reality of that.
Right.
And then what I hope to start soon, actually, there's a couple other books in the works too. One talking about why biblical teaching on spiritual gifts is still relevant for us today, and another probably developing something from my first miracles book that was in an appendix there, talking about spirits. Actually, Strauss, whom I mentioned earlier, he didn't deny the stuff about exorcism and all that. He didn't believe in other kinds of miracles, but he was kind of on board with that because he saw analogies, because at nights he'd go to seances and stuff. So I'm not recommending that. But anyway, looking at different anthropological reports about spirit possession, different cultures, and then working with that for a New Testament background. But then finally, what I'm really looking forward to, I mean, not that I'm not looking forward to the others, but I'm looking forward to getting back to another commentary on, I did a little one on Romans, but this is to do a nice big one on Romans.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so we'll definitely be watching for that. So everyone, thank you so much, Dr. Keener, for talking with us today. And so the booklet is entitled Miracles. If you would like to get a copy of that, it's available as an ebook or a paperback. Just go to press.ratiochristi.org, or if you are in Canada, go to press.ratiochristi.ca, and you can grab a booklet today. So thank you for your time, Dr. Keener.
It's my privilege to be with you, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.